welcome back to Ancient Sumer. In the last two videos, I will tell you about life conditions of ancient Sumerians and how we know about them. Health conditions, crowding, commuting, food. In the end, our problems are similar to those of the Sumerians, all legitimate human concerns. At the end of those videos, you may better understand, or not, why Sumerians decided to live in those mega cities, and if you would like to live in one of them. As we saw in the first video, Sumerians present themselves as city dwellers. Was it the Sumerian dream to live in a city? Well, Sumerians certainly look happy. They smile all the time. But for real, the Sumerian smile most probably hides a harsh life. Instability, social inequalities, crowding, hard work, epidemic and disease, constant fear of climatic disasters such as flood or drought that could cause starvation in the end. Putting it this way, life in ancient Sumerian cities does not sound like a bed of roses, and it certainly was not. But in prosperous times, when all was fine, there were certainly numerous advantages to live in those mega cities. Or Sumerians would have moved. Looks as if it was their best choice in the end. Those times were difficult and unstable. That is for sure. Why is that? First, the wars. Endless wars between cities, because kings always want to rule over the land of Sumer and not only over one or two cities. There are further risks of war when the king dies, if his eldest son is not strong enough, for instance. And wars can be brutal from what we see. So no wonder that you do not feel too much safe during such violent times. Then, what is the advantage of living in a city? The walls. The city is like a shelter. But on the other hand, was everything always quiet and peaceful between inhabitants? Archaeology brings us evidence of violent internal conflicts in Tel Brak in northern Mesopotamia, but so far we do not have evidence for similar situations in the south. Natural disasters were another cause for instability. Seasonal floods were extremely unpredictable. They did not happen at a fixed date and could be extreme in both ways. Too much water, flood, which provoke flood, like overflowing, or not enough water, drought. A whole harvest could be destroyed in one day. In worst case scenario, a whole village could be destroyed, even a whole city. By contrast, not enough water meant that not all fields could be opened for cultivation in the next year, and that marshes could dry out. In both cases, this means less food and less job in the countryside. In the cities, consequences were considerable. Risk of hunger, of course, risk of losing your job, and finally the arrival of migrants who changed the landscape of the city. They could become beggars or thieves or worse. But migrants also brings new ideas and talents and maybe changes for the best. Overall, there is a better chance of food stock in the city that can hopefully be equally redistributed between inhabitants. Despite this very dark picture of everyday life during uncertain times, living in the city may have seemed a bit less hazardous than living in the countryside. You get better protection in war times, probable food stock. Well, that is hopefully. The city was offering some kind of safety net. The city may have offered other advantages. Think about commuting, for instance. Everything is closer when you live in a city. The market, the temple, the working places, that is, as long as you don't work in the fields or are not assigned at the canal maintenance, that can be quite far away. But getting closer to everything may not have been that obvious in Sumer. Remember that some of those cities were huge. Commuting from one end to the other, in Lagash, for instance, may not have been something you were doing on a daily basis to get your bread or water or to go to work, for instance. And there were no buses or subways or any public transport, but you could always take your donkey or sledge to glide on the sand, for instance. To make life easier, some working places probably were close to residential district, which seems to have been the case in Lagash. We also know from the text that some people living in this district of war, the circled one, were working for the temple. Current and future research will probably tell us more about all this one day. Organizations around cores may have been another essential feature of the Sumerian cities. In Uruk, the first city grew from two separate districts, Eana and Kulab. The feeling to belong to one of these districts was still strong 100 years later. It is possible that other cities were organized around two or more cores, in Lagash for instance, but we need further evidence for archaeology or from the text to sustain this impression. If we accept this idea, what would have been the relationship between those centers? Probably they were collaborating most of the time, but they could have been in conflict, as was the case in Telbrak. Here again, future research will tell us more about this. Another thing to consider is that resources in the city may have been more diversified, which is always nice, for food and many other products. Cities were trade centers. Remember the importance of the harbors in the city of Ur. Materials from abroad were available in the city, timber, metal, stones, good quality timber. Those were appealing for an upper middle class who would like to have original objects made of gold or lapis lazuli. Specialized workers were required to make those, which means new job opportunities. This is always appealing. Merchants and others could get rich, improve their family situation, and eventually climb up the social ladder. It may not be so bad after all to move to the city. So this is it. In the next video, you are moving in one of those cities. What will your life be like?